Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the part of the lesson that has looking at comparing coverage of major news networks on current events. For this particular part of the lesson, we're going to actually fill in a chart as we read and analyze both reading print sources and also view network news sources as well. So please follow along to the presentation and proceed to the other screencasts that have been posted in succession. Okay, let's get started here. For part one, we're going to look at print sources. We're going to look at the same topic from two different print sources to be exact, and we're going to fill out the chart later on. So let's go ahead and get started by reading the sources together. The first one here is from CNN, and it's entitled 6 Takeaways from Trump's Impeachment Trial. The second one is from Fox News, and it's Trump acquitted in second impeachment trial on charge of inciting January 6th riot. Let's go ahead and read, and then identify forms of bias and analyze it in the chart right here. So let's go into the link right now and read together. So these are 6 takeaways from Trump's impeachment trial, with the video there that might summarize it for you that you can watch later. From CNN, after a brief Sunday morning surprise when it appeared former President Donald Trump's unprecedented second impeachment trial could feature witnesses and drag on perhaps for weeks, senators rallied around the idea of wrapping things up instead of, and soon voted to acquit the former president. The vote was 43 not guilty, 57 guilty, short of the 67 guilty votes needed to convict. Trump has now been acquitted of inciting a riotous mob to attack the Capitol on January 6th, an episode that interrupted the final tally of Electoral College votes that sealed Joe Biden's victory of the 2020 presidential election. Here are 6 key takeaways from Trump's history-making trial. Number 1. Often in opening, Democrats let Trump off. So, House Democrats forced Trump's second impeachment, presenting a compelling case that he incited an attack on the Capitol and driving a wedge between Republicans willing to look the other way versus those abhorred by Trump's behavior. Number 2, on Saturday morning after CNN's Jamie Gangel reported shocking new details about Trump's behavior on January 6th, Democrats found themselves on the cusp of demanding true accountability. They were joined by 5 Republicans in an effort to call witnesses, especially Representative Jamie Herrera Butler, a Washington Republican who had been instrumental in calling out the Trump defense team's counterfactual claim that Trump opposed the rioters rather than cheering them. Finding enough Republicans to convict Trump was still going to be a high bar, and the Democrats would have to offer Republicans a chance to call their own witnesses. But rather than push ahead and exploit the opening, Democrats decided to enter a written statement from Herrera Butler into a record, and of course allowing the impeachment trial to proceed toward Trump's expected acquittal. Having the trial over will help Biden get down to business, but it will leave Americans who hope Trump could be blocked from future political office wondering what might have been if Democrats could have been a little more ruthless in their protection of the Constitution. Number 2, the GOP is still Trump's party. Trump once quipped that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. His lawyers subsequently pushed a claim in court that as president, Trump couldn't be charged for doing that either. It turns out that he could also dispatch a riotous mob of Pennsylvania Avenue to attack the U.S. Capitol, with his own vice president inside, and most Republican senators would stick by him. 7 Republican senators voted that Trump was guilty of incitement, but most Republicans argued the trial itself was unconstitutional because Trump was no longer president, saying the fact that trumped any evidence presented during the trial. In moments of frustration with the GOP, Trump has mused about starting his own political party, but it doesn't seem that he needs to. When his lawyers manufactured an alternate reality in which he was calling for peace as rioters sacked the Capitol, the Republicans who were among those targeted by the mob grasped at a lifeline that they couldn't watch video of Mike Pence's evacuation and Utah Senator Mitt Romney's near miss with rioters alongside Trump's words leading up to the riot and then vote to acquit him is just the latest evidence that Trump's sway over the party is far from diminished. Number 3, Twitterless Trump is much quieter force. A pianist who can't play, a soprano who can't sing, and Trump without Twitter share silence. He hasn't been heard from directly since retreating to a sort of self-imposed post-election exile at his private Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. So one of the jarring elements of the trial was hearing his voice again in hours of video played by House impeachment managers to make their case. Trump may still have Republican lawmakers in check, but it's much harder for the public to know on a moment-by-moment basis what he's actually thinking. That's an interesting prospect for American politics going forward. The marching orders during an impeachment trial are easy: acquit. But Trump must have been frustrated, fuming privately, and dying to get his thoughts out in the open during this trial. We're left to wonder what they were, or wait to read it in the papers or hear on CNN.com, rather than seeing them pop up on our phones every few moments. Republican women are profiles in courage. Profiles encouraged with the nod to the book of Senator John F. Kennedy wrote about former Senate colleagues. Here means willing to stand up to a party and buck convention. Politicians are most interesting when they're standing up for something that's hard to stand up for. It should not go unnoticed that among the key Republicans who stood up to Trump were several key women. Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney saw her status as the number 3 Republican in the House threatened when she voted to impeach Trump. Herrera Butler, who also voted to impeach, put out a statement rejecting his lawyer's defense as commonly incorrect. And among the 7 Republican senators who voted to convict were moderate Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Next down here, Mitch McConnell is not a profile encouraged. Compare Cheney's actions and statements to those of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and it was made clear to reporters in January that McConnell thought his impeachment trial should go forward. He spoke out against Trump, inspired insurrection on the Senate floor, but when it came to saying the proceedings against former president were constitutional, McConnell voted no. When it came time to punish the former president who unleashed an attack on the institution McConnell loves, he told colleagues he would vote to acquit. After voting to acquit, though, he offered a stunning rebuke of Trump's behavior during the speech on the Senate floor, dismissing Trump's conspiracy theories and blaming Trump for the riot. But he argued it was inappropriate to vote for impeachment because Trump was no longer in office, essentially trying to have it both ways on a technicality. And here's the last point. This is not the end of the story. Trump's acquittal won't be the end of accountability for the riot his words helped cause or his attempts to overturn the election. There are hundreds of cases pending for rioters, and their cases have begun to weave his words into arguments. Take the case of Jessica Watkins, the oath keeper, who federal prosecutors said in court documents this week waited for Trump's command before marching on the Capitol. Prosecutors in Georgia have opened a criminal investigation into Trump's effort to influence election results. None of those cases, even if they lead to convictions, could bar Trump from future office like impeachment, but they are sure to keep the riot in the public eye. So before we go to the next source here, guys, clearly you can see some possible elements of bias within this story, as, of course, it shows its way from CNN.com and CNN Politics to be exact. So we're going to move ahead into the next reading here, and then we will, of course, dissect that chart and those elements of bias later on. Please proceed to the next reading and part of the presentation.